So, good afternoon, dear colleagues, dear panelists, dear ambassadors and dear colleagues, Mr. Kubilius and Mr. Ansip. I'm happy that today we, the three of us, are co-hosting this event for the Taiwanese 2024 elections and the implications for the defense and democracy. The topic that gathering us today is to acknowledge and analyze the results of the recent parliamentary and presidential elections that took place in Taiwan on the 13th of January. Once again, the people of Taiwan have demonstrated their unwavering commitment to democracy and the robustness of their electoral process. We warmly welcome the opportunity for citizens in Taiwan to freely express their will through such a democratic and transparent process. At a time when democratic values are under pressure in many parts of the world, Taiwan's commitment to democracy was demonstrated yet again in the peaceful and orderly conduct of the elections. Taiwan and Europe share the same beliefs in the importance of democratic principles and institutions in ensuring the voice of people is heard and respected. I would like also to underline our continued commitment to the peaceful cohabitation and a solution of any issues across the Taiwan Strait. We firmly believe that maintaining the status quo is essential for peace and stability in the region of South China Sea. We urge also all parties to refrain from provocative actions that could lead to unnecessary escalation and a worsening of the current situation. In the aftermath of the elections, look forward to the opportunity to further deepen our mutual beneficiary cooperation with Taiwan in various fields, including economy, innovation, semiconductor technology, energy, and much more. Taiwan's impressive achievements in this area make Taiwan a very important partner for Europe, and we are committed to enhance and expand our collaboration. To facilitate this cooperation, we continue to advocate strongly for the establishment of an appropriated institutional framework, such as the bilateral investment agreement, but not only, that will provide a solid foundation for our relations with Taiwan. By strengthening our economic ties, we can create opportunities for growth, innovation, and prosperity for both people of Taiwan and European Union. I'm also very happy now to pass the floor to my co-hosts, Mr. Kubilius and Mr. Ansip, before opening up to the distinguished panelists who will share today their insight of the Taiwanese elections and what they mean for the future of Taiwan cross-strait relations, Taiwan and the Taiwan-EU cooperation in other significant fields. So please, my dear colleague, welcome. Please, Andrews.
Okay, Andrew. Thanks a lot. Well, my name is Andrius Kubilius. I am a member of European Parliament from Lithuania, former Prime Minister, and so on. I do not have any written comments, so it means that I will speak from my heart, really. I'm looking into the title of our discussion, first of all, which, is a very interesting title, 2024 Taiwan election and its implications for the defense of democracy. And my immediate answer is very simple. Those are very positive implications for defense of democracy, those elections which we witnessed quite recently. And I will tell just two reasons why. First of all, here in European Parliament, myself and my colleagues, we are really very much involved into different issues, to promote democracy, to defend democracy in different parts of Europe. Since I am coming from Lithuania, of course, for us, it's very important, developments, Ukraine, Russia, Belarus, and so on and so on. And, and sometimes we meet some kind of different opinion, when we are saying that, well, we need to look into possibility, for example, for Russia and Belarus to move into democracy. People are saying, well, Russians or Belarusians will never become a democracy because they have some kind of, no, I don't know, different mentality or history, will not allow them to become democracy. I am always refusing that, argument. And I am sometimes using, most powerful argument from my point of view is exactly, Taiwan. Because if people are saying, democracy cannot be established or survive in Russia and so on, usually people, are saying that there is some kind of this, genetics of people which do not allow people, some kind of people, to become democracy. And a lot of, arguments are also that Chinese people cannot become a democracy. Never, Confucian, philosophy or whatever, thinking does not allow Chinese people to become a democracy. And here we have very clear example, of people in Taiwan who are of the same, Chinese origin, of the same, ethnic group, and who are, doing perfectly well with democracy. So this is one thing why elections in Taiwan and democracy in Taiwan has very positive implications for defense of democracy worldwide. Second, 2 years ago, back in 2021, I was member of delegation, perhaps that was the first official European Parliament delegation, which visited Taiwan during pandemic. Very interesting impressions. But our goal was to look into how successfully small, much bigger than Lithuania, but small in comparison with China, small Taiwan country is able to defend its, very vital democracy, being in the neighborhood of big authoritarian country. For me, that was really very amazing. I saw a lot of similarities what we are facing when we are next to, big authoritarian Russia. Also in addition to that, authoritarian Belarus, very similar methods, how those big authoritarian countries are trying, to influence our democracies. And my conclusion at the end was very simple. Taiwanese democracy are much better prepared to defend itself against all those, hybrid attacks and so on and so on. That is why when I came back to get European Parliament, I said, look, we Europeans were saying that we are, something like historically, countries with a lot of democratic experiences. I said, well, we need to learn a lot from Taiwan, how you are doing, how you are using all the modern technologies in a very democratic way, really to defend your people's right, to have a full-fledged democracy in your country. So that is again very important implication for all the world. We need to learn from Taiwan how really democracies can be defended. When they are living and living and surviving and flourishing in such a difficult neighborhood. So thanks a lot and good luck.
Thank you, Andrius. Please, Mr. Ansip.
Thank you. I'm Andrus Ansip. I'm a member of the European Parliament, representing the Renew Group, but before this mandate, I was Vice President of the European Commission responsible for digital single market. And before that, I acted as Prime Minister of Estonia during the 9 years. We acted together with Andrus Kubilius. I think during international financial crisis, we did really well. Our cooperation was really good. But sorry to say, we didn't do enough to support Taiwan at that time. So my country, small Estonia, decided to follow one China policy in the year 1994. And it was a pragmatic decision at that time for Estonia, because UN Security Council permanent member Russia was unpredictable already at that time, whereas People's Republic of China declared that they respect sovereignty, territorial integrity, and inviolability of borders of all the countries It doesn't matter are those countries small or large ones, they respect their sovereignty and territorial integrity and inviolability of borders. And we believe those statements. And now, because of the war in Ukraine, we understood how China is interpreting sovereignty, territorial integrity, and inviolability of borders. People's Republic of China has not condemned Russia. So, because of this war in Ukraine, I think more people in Europe, everywhere around the world, started to think about Taiwan. The EU is already the fourth largest trade partner for Taiwan, and with $50 billion the European Union is the biggest foreign investor in Taiwan, but this is not enough. We have to do more. We share common values of democracy, freedom, and human rights. And I'm absolutely sure like-minded countries, they have to stick together. I'm sure the cooperation between, or relations between my small Estonia and Taiwan, between the European Union and Taiwan will also deepen under the new president, Lai Ching-te. I always admired the free people of Taiwan and your strong democracy. I wish Taiwan every success, and I hope there will be peace in your region, but also in Europe. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ansip. I would like also to welcome see a lot of other colleagues, Petras, and Butikov, and many others from different political groups. Now I have the big pleasure to give the floor to the ambassador of Taiwan and representative office of to the EU in Belgium, Mr. Dr. Roy Chin Lee. Please.
Thank you very much. Let me start by thanking Mr. Kovachev, Mr. Kobylos, and also Mr. Ansip, not only for co-hosting this very important discussion, but also I want to thank you for those powerful testimonies and statements you just shared with us about the achievement of Taiwan in this election and beyond, and also the reason why you need to support Taiwan, and also the reason why we need to deepen our partnership. So I take this opportunity to thank you on behalf of the Taiwanese people for those very strong words. With good friends like these three gentlemen sitting next to me here in Brussels, make my job very easy. So that's also my personal thank to you. Well, this is my actually the end of my first month here in Brussels. But I have enjoyed really my new assignment here. I enjoyed the conversation, I enjoyed many of the discussions, and also I enjoyed the weather so far. You know, last week, Brussels is actually warmer than Taipei. 11 degrees in Taipei and 12 in Brussels. I was a little bit surprised. But we have the big snow, the biggest in 10 years. So it's very diversified. Even the weather is diversified, not the supply chain. So it's a very interesting first month. And thank you for providing this opportunity for me to share with you a kind of scene-setter introductory briefing on the outcome of the Taiwanese election. My colleague have prepared two very nice slides to share on the screen. So let me start by the presidential election. For technical background notes, we have actually combined two elections into one voting on January 13th. The first election is to decide who will be Taiwan's next president. Basically, Taiwan has a presidential system. So the president is the head of the state and also the head of the administration. Certainly, we have a premier prime minister, but the president makes most of the major decisions, especially decisions relating to foreign policy, security, defense policy, and of course, cross-strait policy. Then we have the parliamentary election. So also on the same day, on two separate ballots, we decide the members of the parliament for our next parliament. Now, people always ask why Taiwan is having this long transition period, because the new president will not be taking office until the 20th of May. So literally we have 4 months transition period. It's a little bit unique. The reason being that 10, 15 years ago, we have two separate elections. We have the election for the parliament in January, then we have the presidential election in March. We have to have the parliamentary voting in January because our new parliament starts their session tomorrow. So that is the reason we have to have the January election, the election in January. But people decided that 2 votes within 3 months is too frequent, and that discouraged people to come out and vote. So somehow we decided we merge these 2 elections into one. So it's just for technical reasons. And because of that background, we have this very long transition period. This year, as you can see from the screen, the ruling party for the last 8 years win for the next presidency. Now, our presidents can serve for 2 4-year terms. So that's 8 years together. And President Tsai Ing-wen, the current president, has been serving already in the last 8 years. And he came from the same ruling party, which is the Democratic Progressive Party, or DPP. And this 13th of January election, Taiwanese people decided that the next presidency will stay with the DPP, with the current ruling party for the president. The running mates, the candidates from DPP is Mr. Lai Ching-te, William Lai, and also our former ambassador to the US, Ms. Pei-King Xiao. And that explains a little bit why we have a kind of big reshuffle of our ambassadors around the world, because he has to come back from DC to serve as the vice president candidate. And we have 2 opposition parties. One is the main opposition party, which is the KMT. The KMT is able to win roughly 34% of the vote. And we have a third new party that under the name of TPP, or the Taiwan People's Party. The TPP party is only 4 years old. So it's actually already a very significant achievement for that 4-year-old party to win, to take away about almost 27% of the vote for the president voting. Now people ask, so that means is this imply that there are 60% of the Taiwanese population disagree with the ruling DPP party? My answer is no, because this is not a simple mathematic problem to add all the opposition votes into one. They say they don't agree. If the 2 opposition parties merge into one single coalition, I don't really know the outcome. Maybe the DPP will continue to win with a higher supporting rate. So, but anyway, they tried, but they failed to form a coalition back in November. So the DPP will stay in power for the next 4 years as the president. Next slide, please. So on the second election on our parliamentary, it's more interesting. Before this year, the ruling party, which is the party which wins the presidential election, also controlled the parliament. So in the last 8 years, under President Tsai Ing-wen's presidency, they have the president's position, and also they have the majority in the parliament. So it's what we call it the full control of the 2 systems. But for the latest result, the ruling DPP party lost 10 seats. So they are now they are able only to win 51 seats. Now, we have a total of 113 parliamentary seats. So that means to control the parliament, you need 57 seats. So the ruling TPP party is this time around 6 seats below the threshold. And they lost actually 10 seats. There's a strong message actually from the Taiwanese population. To the contrary, the largest opposition party, KMT, wins, their seats increased 14 to reach the number of 52, but there are also about 5 seats under the threshold of 57. That makes the new TPP party, the 4-year-old party, very critical. We call it the critical minority because they were able to win 8 seats in this parliament. Now, for the parliament in Taiwan, we have 2 systems of voting. One is based on constituency, about 70% of the seats, or 70 based on constituency voting. 30% of the parliament MPs are decided by party line voting. The new TPP party wins all the 8 seats based on party line voting. They are not able to win any MP from on the constituency based voting. So the slide stops here, but I would like to share, first of all, what's the message or the implication we are reading. First of all, there's a strong consensus in Taiwan about the continuation on our foreign policy, including our partnership with European Union and member states. And there's a strong message to continue our cross-strait policy, which I'll come back a little bit later. And also there's a strong message from the population about the continuation on our defense security policy, because that's the 3 major areas where the president has the power to make major decisions. But also we are seeing the demand from the population to accelerate the reform agenda. We're seeing the demand to reform the political process in Taiwan. We are seeing the demand to have a intense cross-party cooperation. So now the party is able to control the parliament. Now we're seeing the demand for the new government to increase their governance efficiency, to increase their governance transparency, and also there's a demand for the government to reflect on the people's wish to make economic growth, distribution of wealth more as the top priorities. So that's the 2 major implications. For today's discussion, I think I'll address a little bit on the meaning of the continuation of the cross-strait and foreign policy from based on the outcome of this election. Now, the president-elect, William Lai, who is also our former vice president, has stated in his winning night speech that he will be focused on 4 major points in areas in terms of his foreign cross-strait policy. With China, he has stated that he's going to ensure that his number 1 priority is to maintain a stable and principled leadership in terms of engagement with China. And he also calls upon our Chinese friends and colleagues to recognize and accept the democratic outcome in Taiwan's election and start to engage with us and recreate communication channels with the newly elected Taiwanese leadership. With the world, especially with the EU, he committed to continue enhancing partnership with democracies. And when he speaks, what he is talking about is certainly not only the US, Canada, but also EU and EU member states. On its defense and security policy, he has committed, he believed in the notion of peace through strength. So we'll continue to invest in our defense capabilities as a way to deter and maintain peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait. And lastly, which is quite new and interesting, he emphasized that his government is going to focus on enhancing economic security. This is actually the first time Taiwanese president has put economic security on top of his priority. So that's a new area that we're looking forward to have more cooperation with our EU colleagues. Now, as already Mr. Kibbles mentioned, that the very fact that Taiwan has been able to successfully carry out this democratic process is already, to many of our Chinese friends and colleagues, a kind of provocation, because it is a demonstration that democracy is very consistent with Chinese culture. Right? So we always joke in Taiwan that the outcome of this election indicate there are 4 winners and 1 loser. The first winner is the Taiwanese population. Despite the fact that we are subject to the most intense, most explicit election interference any democratic country is subject to, we are able to make the decision independently and based on the voter and population's own decision. So it is already making the Taiwanese people the winner. And the second winner is, of course, the ruling DPP, which continues its policy as to take the leadership in the government. And the main opposition parties, the KMT, which increased their seats in the parliament by 14, is already one. They consider themselves as a winner. And the fourth winner, of course, is the new DPP party, which is only 4 years ago, and they were able to take a very significant part of in that Taiwanese political landscape. And there's only 1 loser, that is probably China, our dear friends across the Taiwan Strait, because they are not really happy about the outcome. They really don't like the idea that the ruling DPP party stays in power, and they have already demonstrated their displeasure, and they are trying to draw red lines for the administration. I guess many of our distinguished experts join the discussion. Will be touching upon this issue later on. So finally, I would like to share some of the recommendations for deepening EU-Taiwan partnership in the long run. First of all, I think it is very consistent with the EU interest to stand firm with Taiwan, at least for the next 4 months, against the surge of Chinese intimidations. It is consistent with the EU interest because the Chinese is not only intimidating in Taiwan, China is also trying to intimidate many other parts of the world, including EU and member states. So saying no to China is demonstrating a position of the EU, not only to defend the democracy in Taiwan, but also to tell China that this is not a way to go. Yesterday there was a conference, and people are debating how we should look at China. Is China an economic partner, and how can we deal with that? I think for us it's quite simple. We recognize China is a very important partner, very critical partner in many regards, but also China is a partner that in many cases they don't follow the rules, and they want to punch you in the face when you say no to their demand. And we are trying to tell them, let's come back to the rule and don't twist people's arms whenever they say no. And that's the only thing, I mean, from a Taiwanese perspective, we would like to respect that. And that's, we believe, also is consistent with the EU interest to tell China that they have to follow the rules. They don't punch the people, they don't coerce people if their demands not meet. And also, we would like to invite and encourage our EU colleagues and friends to consider deepening engagement with Taiwan as a way to say no to China. So, and also as a way to increase the EU's interest by considering Taiwan as a trusted partner to achieve not only strategic autonomy, but also on many other dimensions, including the defense of democracy. We understand and respect that many EU and member states follow the One China policy, but we would like to invite EU and member states to reconsider and to monitor, to really to rethink: are we taking too much weight on this kind of self-censorship about the implementation, the meaning of One China policy? In fact, around the world, different countries have different flexibilities about One China policy, and there are many things that we can continue to do without crossing the line of One China policy. That is a very important area that I would like to share. And also, very soon, and maybe starting from today, we are happy to share with you our experience on 2 things. First one is on FIMI, the foreign information manipulation and interference, based on our experience in the last 12 months. we are trying to organize some events also in coming April on FIMI and election interference. That's the first area. And second area is certainly on economic security. We understand that the EU, the Commission and the Parliament has been very supportive to move forward with this economic security package. With all the 4 pillars, export control, inbound investment, outbound investment screening, and lastly is the safeguarding the outcome of critical technologies. Taiwan has been doing that for the last 25 years. Of course, we are targeting Taiwan. We have very successful experiences, but we have some not so successful, but we are willing to share. So working with Taiwan is not only to say no to China, it's also taking Taiwan as a valuable and trusted partnership on a bilateral basis. And I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, dear friend, Dr. Troy Chin Lee, the representative of Taiwan to the EU and Belgium. Now we start with, I think, a very important and interesting part, the seminar discussion. And first online is Mr. Michael Kohl, Research Fellow, Prospect Foundation, Senior Advisor, International Republican Institute. He is going to talk with us about mechanism and aims of PRC interference in Taiwan's 2024 elections, something what already Mr. Lee mentioned before. Please, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much. It's an honor to join you, members of EU Parliament, representative, and my good friend Roy Lee, as well as colleagues in Europe and United States. I have to apologize. I have a bad cold, so if I sound stuffy, I apologize, but I'll do my best. Before I start, I also need to point out that my views are personal and do not necessarily reflect those of the International Republican Institute or the Prospect Foundation. This is my 5th election in Taiwan. I have been here since 2005, which has given me some perspective, if you will, on how Beijing has sought to interfere with and to influence the electoral processes in Taiwan. So I have experienced some continuity. We certainly have seen changes as well, and I would argue that the changes have become more prominent under Xi Jinping in recent years. One important takeaway, I think, that we've seen repeatedly in elections, and certainly in the past 3, but also starting with Taiwan's very first direct presidential election in 1996, is that the PRC has very little, if any, soft power or instruments of soft power to influence the outcome of elections in Taiwan. So far, Beijing continues to be unable to find or to offer a narrative that can really appeal to the majority of the people in Taiwan. And I would say whether they vote DPP, KMT, or now Taiwan People's Party. And we need to ask ourselves, like, what would be the benefits to Taiwan or to the people of Taiwan of voting the way that Beijing wants them to vote, other than reduced and I would say probably temporary nature of the threat. The Hong Kong experience over the years and certainly in recent years has also underscored the costs of closer ties, so erosion of freedoms, and that's because Beijing is always, and I repeat, always transactional. So that if the Taiwanese people had voted for a party that is more amenable to Beijing, that transactional approach to cross-strait relations would inevitably come at a price to liberties that the people of Taiwan, regardless of who they vote for, have embraced over the years. So all of this ultimately reduces, if not completely negates, the PRC's soft power appeal and its ability to use positives to influence the voter choices in Taiwan. So as a result, most of its efforts in the context of elections in Taiwan and democratic processes writ large are therefore coercive and or cooptative. So what I propose to do here is briefly give an overview of 4 key areas where in this election, but also in previous elections, China has sought to influence either the outcome of the elections or the environment following the elections. So the first component is cognitive warfare. The second one is psychological warfare, gray zone operations. The third one is co-optation. And finally, the fourth one is the threatened punitive measures, implicit or explicit, following the carrying out of elections in Taiwan. So the first round, cognitive warfare, we saw particularly in the lead up to this election, the narrative that the DPP is somehow a disaster for Taiwan, that presidential candidate William Lai is an independence worker. Another one that we saw quite frequently is that a vote for the DPP equals war. And we have seen a number of influential politicians, retired military personnel who were back in Taiwan, who were also encouraging that view that war would be disastrous and that Taiwan therefore needs to capitulate and make concessions, because this is all ultimately part of the scare tactic that Beijing was using to try to compel the Taiwanese to avoid voting for the DPP. One of the key platforms that we have seen in recent years in cognitive warfare aimed at Taiwanese is TikTok, and primarily influencers using TikTok. What we saw is a presentation of a positive image of the PRC, promotion of unification or reunification, as Beijing calls it. We saw intense messaging suggesting that DPP is corrupt. It was unable to ensure provision of eggs, that there were issues with the vaccines during the COVID pandemic. And we have seen, again, through TikTok platforms, a lot of accounts were created in the weeks leading up to the election. They were promoting certain political parties or politicians, but also emphasizing the need to embrace the so-called 1992 consensus, that Beijing maintains is a precondition for resumption of dialogue in the Taiwan Strait. Still on TikTok, recent research by Taiwan AI Labs shows that 62% of the posts mentioning China were supportive of the PRC and favoring unification and praising China. Conversely, 95% of the posts mentioning Taiwan were negative, and the 2 most common narratives on TikTok during that period were that the DPP has, quote unquote, destroyed Taiwan, and that Taiwan should be unified with China. Research by another organization, IORG, also in Taiwan, shows that PRC narratives were throughout the elections reinforced or spread by influencers in Taiwan, including TV personalities, talking heads on political talk shows, politicians, current or retired, as well as influencers on YouTube. We have seen over the years funding for influencers, so their YouTube pages, Facebook fan pages, so-called content farms as well, that are websites that produce content that tends to favor pro-Beijing narratives. We also have seen, following the elections, allegation of voter fraud and irregularities made by influencers who were tied or close to certain political parties. And one presidential candidate has also suggested that there were irregularities, which ultimately serves to delegitimize the outcomes of the elections, the processes, the integrity. And that is part of a longer game that Beijing is playing as well, with a view ultimately of delegitimizing President Lai and preparing for the next elections already in 2028. It's very important to note that not all of this misinformation, disinformation originates in the PRC. There is similar content that is generated or spread domestically for political advantage, and it just so happens that it dovetails with the PRC cognitive warfare. I would point out that this does not mean that the local people who are using that rhetoric are necessarily ideologically aligned with the PRC or even support unification. But their behavior certainly inadvertently supports the PRC narratives that Beijing is hoping that the Taiwanese people will internalize. Second wrong is psychological warfare, gray zone operations. We had seen over the years, and certainly following the visit by Nancy Pelosi to Taiwan in August 2023, 22, sorry, PLA activity, so PLA Navy, PLA Air Force, are increasingly active around Taiwan, crossing the median line in the Taiwan Strait. And this is, again, if you take a wider view, this is all part of an effort to shape the environment prior to the elections. Now, in the week leading up to the election, that activity was somewhat reduced. That was mostly because of adverse weather conditions in the Taiwan Strait. But as I maintained, that needs to be looked at in a larger context and an extended time frame. What we did see during the elections or leading up to the elections were intrusions over Taiwan proper of surveillance balloons. We saw a large number of those, which constitutes escalation short of war. It is an erosion of Taiwan's sovereignty, and it puts the administration in Taipei in a very difficult position because they either decide to shoot them down, which could risk escalation, or you don't shoot them down and that risk being seen as weak. And implicit in this is a gradual escalation that the next phase could be intrusions by UAVs into Taiwan's airspace. As we saw in the past 24 hours, China has made adjustments to the M503 flight corridor across the Taiwan Strait, which increases the risk of miscommunication, accidents, and inadvertent escalation. The third one is co-optation. So we saw in the lead up to the elections, sponsored and all expenses paid trips for local politicians to different parts of China, where they would oftentimes meet up with representatives from the Taiwan Affairs Office or other CCP control entities. In return for those visits, there were encouragements for these politicians to go back to Taiwan, use their influence for bloc voting for certain opposition politicians. We see through this process as well, and this is not necessarily recent, a process of or attempt to co-opt local politicians. And this is especially important for Beijing when the DPP is in power, because even if President Lai will be in office for the next 4 years, if you successfully co-opt politicians or business people or civil society or different groups at the local level, it gives Beijing the ability to bypass central government. So this is key to eroding the good functions of a government under the DPP. We have seen illicit funding from the PRC of a number of individuals from opposition parties as well. Other areas that warrant a scrutiny is the role of pro-CCP organized crime in Taiwan. Underground banking, we saw the uses of Bitcoin as well, and different cryptocurrencies to send money to Taiwan when money from the PRC to political parties in Taiwan is illegal. So the key institution in Taiwan that tracks those movements of money is the Ministry of Justice Investigation Bureau. It has been tracking this activity and responding accordingly, but stopping this altogether is a major challenge. And the Chinese side is constantly adapting as well and using new technologies and new means by which to send money into Taiwan in an attempt to co-opt individuals and influence electoral outcomes. The final wrong is the threatened punitive measures. So we saw almost immediately after the elections on January 13th, the poaching of official diplomatic allies. And we're also seeing ramped up efforts by Beijing to convince the international community to adhere to what it calls a one China principle rather than other countries' one China policy. And this is further constrainment of other countries' willingness to engage Taiwan within the ambit of their one China policy. Several months prior to the elections in Taiwan, there were already rumors of economic retaliation by Beijing if the Taiwanese people did not make the right decision as per Beijing's preferences. So one area or one possibility is the canceling or abrogation of the Economic Cooperation Framework Agreement that was signed back in 2009, and also the intensification of targeted sectoral sanctions against different sectors of Taiwan's economy as a means to create leverage and pressure on the administration. We have also seen threats against other countries that have also led to, for example, a number of European countries avoided naming the actual winning candidates in the January 13th elections in Taiwan. We saw oblique references to the winners, which ultimately tarnishes Taiwan's democratic accomplishments and also sends a signal that might erode its statehood. So this kind of pressure is also long-term. It's also in the background and oftentimes rears its ugly head when Taiwan holds its elections. So all in all, it's quite difficult to quantify the extent to which the interventions by Beijing influenced electoral outcomes in Taiwan. And one takeaway from observing Taiwan's elections over the years and attempts by Beijing to influence them is how resilient Taiwanese society has become, particularly to the coercive elements of Chinese efforts to influence elections. Now, we can certainly ask, would Lai Ching-te and Xiao Bi-khim have won by a larger margin if there were no such external interference by Beijing? Perhaps. It's difficult to know. Would Ko Wen-je from the Taiwan People's Party or the KMT have done as well as they did without the narratives that were advanced by Beijing? So I believe my time is up. I will conclude here. So thanks for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cole. Indeed, very interesting overview of the interference of PRC in the Taiwan's 2024 elections. We are continuing now with Mr. Gray Sargent, Associate Fellow, Council of Geostrategy, and he's going to tell us about Taiwan's elections, the response from and implications for the wider region. And please, we around 10 to 12, 15 minutes max.
Thank you very much. It's great to be back in Brussels and a real honor to speak on this panel today. I think I'd like to start off by echoing the remarks about the success of the Taiwanese election and the vibrancy of Taiwanese democracy. And I think it's worth repeating because there are so few liberal democracies in Asia, and that global democracy around the world is in retreat. And even here in the West, trust in the democratic process is being tested. And in Taiwan, they held free, fair elections. It was a lively campaign. The ballots were counted quickly, and the concession speeches came in quickly too, which you can't guarantee nowadays. So that is, it's not just good for the Taiwanese people. There's apparently 4 winners in this election, but not just good for the Taiwanese people, but it's also good for the region as a whole. Political scientists talk about democracy being contagious, and I don't know how good their models are. I'm no political scientist, but I think there's certainly a reason why media coverage in the People's Republic is kept to a minimum when it comes to the elections in Taiwan. And I was interested to hear of a group of Hong Kongers based in the UK visiting Taiwan to observe their elections this time. And no doubt there are peoples in Taiwan's neighborhood who look to Taiwan as a model for democracy. So that's one way that Taiwan is important to the future of the Indo-Pacific. It's also very important in terms of peace and stability too. And I think when countries like Australia and Japan congratulated Lai Ching-te, and they mentioned his name in their statements, I think they were signaling and reminding us that peace and stability in the Taiwan Straits is important, and so is Taiwan's democracy. And I think China's reaction to them statements, pretty normal statements, shows the threat to both those things in the region. And it was just before the election, but the PRC ambassador in Canberra took things, was typically flamboyant with his rhetoric, talking about Australia being dragged over the abyss if they tie themselves to Taiwanese separatist forces, which probably is a step up from playing with fire. But those sort of fire rhetoric to one side, there certainly is a challenge after this election for the region and for liberal democracies in it. To what extent has this election significantly increased that threat? It's difficult to say. Right now, it doesn't seem that in the sort of immediate future, the stakes have been raised especially high. Beijing has been rather muted in its response. We can try and speculate why that might be. A desire to maintain ties with the United States, build on the communication that's emerging there between both countries, perhaps because of China's own domestic woes, and perhaps they're concerned about that, and perhaps they take some heart in the election result, which, although Lai won, he won with a reduced majority, and obviously his party lost control of the legislative yuan. So perhaps that might explain why, for now, that they've been quiet. But I will sort of caveat that with that we're still sort of in the early days, as has been explained. There's a couple of months out until the inauguration, and that's plenty of time for China to apply pressure, pick a better moment, find the right pretext to take action, a time where perhaps their propaganda machine can kick into swing and shift the blame for escalation away from themselves and towards Taipei and Washington. And of course, as Michael Cole has already mentioned, the grey zone tactics never really went away, even if they did perhaps lull slightly during the build up to the vote. So we had the attack on ECFA, the trade deal, a month before Taiwanese voters went to the polls. That involved removing tariff relief on Taiwanese petrochemical imports, and there's another 500 products that they could target next. And we had the poaching of Nauru, and we had the balloons emerge, and also shortly after the vote, a couple of days, maybe a couple of weeks, we saw these sort of pretty sizable military maneuvers around the island continue, which included the crossing of the Taiwan Strait median line by PLA air jets. So that's still there. What are the implications for the region then? These maneuvers around Taiwan aren't just there to demoralize the Taiwanese people and trying to force them to change their mind, but it's also about hemming Taiwan in. It's about encircling the island. It's about advancing, encroaching slowly towards Taiwan, so Beijing can try and assert its sovereignty over the island. And that obviously poses problems for Japan, given its proximity. It poses problems for the US, given its interest in Taiwan, but also its interest in preserving the Taiwan Straits as a waterway which can be freely navigated. And it also poses the problem of possible escalation. As has already been mentioned, Taiwan is put in a pretty tricky situation where it has to choose between maintaining its territorial integrity and avoiding sparking a potential regional crisis. We saw that, we had the balloons mentioned, but shortly after Nancy Pelosi visited Taiwan, there was a lot of activity, but also activity around Taiwan's offshore islands, including the repeated flying of drones around Jingmen. And one of them was shot down, and shortly following that, Taiwan's Ministry of Defense said that it had revised its no shoot first policy. But we are seeing, China take more provocative actions, and other commentators and observers have noted that it's perhaps only a matter of time before a UAV flies past the 24 nautical miles, and then that puts everyone in, as I say, a rather tricky situation, and it will be, should anything escalate, it will be something that everyone in the region has to pay attention to. I think it's also the whole grey zone warfare package is a problem for liberal democracies in the region who want to shape the rules of the road. I mean, Australia and Japan certainly know a thing or two about Beijing weaponizing trade. So when you see it with ECFA and Taiwan, hopefully it resonates with them. But if we want to, and it's not just people in the region, it's also Europeans, the British also have a stake in seeing a free and open Indo-Pacific too. And we also have a stake in seeing the differences across the Straits resolved peacefully. And as our new Foreign Secretary, David Cameron, now Lord Cameron, said straight after the vote, and when he was congratulating Lyde, that this is not just about not using or threatening the use of force, it's also about not threatening or using coercion too. And certainly that whole package that I talked about with ECFA and the poaching of diplomatic allies are all part of that too. And it's designed to demoralize the Taiwanese people, to knock their faith in not just their government, but the whole democratic process. So there is certainly a challenge there that needs to be met. It is a challenge that I think countries in the region like Japan, Australia, and of course the United States are willing to meet. And I hope and expect them to get support from their partners here in Europe as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Now I'd like to give the floor to Madame Valérie Niquette, Senior Research Fellow, Fondation pour la Recherche Stratégique. And she's going to tell us about the peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait, vital for Europe security.
Thank you, Chair. So I will focus actually on what makes Taiwan and Taiwan security so important for Europe and the European Union. And I will focus on these three pillars that has a foundation of relations between Taiwan and Europe, which is economy, to be pragmatic, because many people need pragmatic argument also in order to support Taiwan. Economy related, of course, to security, and then I will end with values. China has been using the difference in size between China, the mainland China and Taiwan as a main argument in order to persuade that to have good relations with China, is tremendous, is very important for the economy. But actually, Taiwan is also a major economic partner for the EU. As you mentioned, it is number 12, and it is increasing in 22 because I think it was only 14 in 2020. It's a very important trade partner. And the EU is also the largest investor in Taiwan. And by the way, the EU is the largest investor in Asia, and not so many people know about it because they all focus on the role of China in the region, but the EU is playing a very important role there, and also for Taiwan. And so there are many dialogues on the economy between the EU and Taiwan, like industrial policy dialogue on digital economy, very important and related to security too, and regular trade consultations. And the more so because Taiwan is also a key player in the global value-added chain, and the resilience of that chain is vital for EU security. As we all know, Taiwan is a key for the technological resilience of our industry as the first producer of semiconductor, and in terms of latest generation, it's more than 90%, I think. So, I mean, Taiwan is absolutely vital, and the security around Taiwan, of course, has consequences for all industry. And with that in mind, it is important, for instance, that TSMC not only build, and this goes to the region, new factories in Japan, I think 2 now, but 1 also in Germany. So there is a common interest there. And of course, in terms of trade, with the new government in place in Taiwan, I think that more should be done in terms of trade agreement and increasing trade between Taiwan and the EU. In 2021, the Commission launched an annual EU trade and investment dialogue. It has been elevated to, I think, ministerial level since 2022. So this is a good move and it should go on. Of course, the bilateral investment agreement is on hold, and this is related to the role and our relations with the PRC. But this evolution contribute also to increase Taiwan de facto international space, and I think it should go on. It's a process that should go on. The economy, as I mentioned, is also related to security. So to go to security issues, when after the election, Joseph Borrell said again that the EU remains concerned about growing tension in the Taiwan Strait and opposes any unilateral attempt to change the status quo. The EU underlines that peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait are key to regional and global security and prosperity. And this is the official position of the European Union. And this reflects very important change in EU policy regarding China on Taiwan since the mid-2010s, 2015, since the beginning of the 2000s, actually. The EU-China policy favors the status quo and does not want any kind of unification or reunification, whatever, as well as a threat to use force or coercion. So this is now ingrained in the EU policy regarding Taiwan. In its 2019 EU-China strategic outlook, the EU qualifies China as a partner on issues of common interest like climate change or whatever, an economic competitor and a systemic rival. And it mentions also that Europe's security, including economic security, is interlinked with peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait. Any disruption or use of force or even coercion by China under any form would have direct consequences on economic security in Europe, as well as the resilience of our industrial production. This new policy of Europe is based on the concept of what some people call principled pragmatism. On one side, the existent One China policy that contributes to safeguard economic ties, with the PRC, but on the other side, there is a de facto reconnaissance of democratic Taiwan. And this de facto existence is increasingly recognized and supported in Europe, including at both the level of the Parliament and the Commission. So this leads to the third pillar of our relations with Taiwan, which is values. In its 2021 EU strategy for cooperation in Indo-Pacific, EU mentions that it will promote an open and rule-based regional security architecture for a normative power like the EU. Taiwan is perceived as a like-minded partner that share common values on democracy, rule of law, and human rights, an important dimension of the EU strategy for the Indo-Pacific. Plus, Taiwan is a very positive, as was mentioned before, example for peaceful regime change and democratization process. So it's a model in that sense. Taiwan has a stellar record of successful democratization and is a direct answer to PRC reject, as was mentioned again, of universality of human rights or democratic principles. I just read yesterday that in terms of gender equality, Taiwan was now ranking first, and this is also a model for other democracies in the region. I think, for instance, Japan or South Korea, they also could learn from Taiwan. So at the border between security and values, Taiwan is also at the forefront of the struggle. It was mentioned by Michael Cohn for freedom of information against information war and disinformation using social media that are important component of China gray zone destabilizing strategy against Taiwan. And that will go on, of course, after the election. As you said, we have to be extremely careful until May and even later. This is really part of China's strategy of transforming the situation in and around Taiwan using disinformation. So on that field, cooperation between the EU and Taiwan are essential components for our value-based external policy. So in terms of, to conclude, if I find my paper, to conclude, so a lot has been done, and sometimes it's not that well perceived in Asia. A lot has already been done when one compares between the EU and the support for Taiwan when one compares with a decade ago. For instance, we witnessed in recent years an upsurge of visits by EU and member states parliamentary delegation to Taiwan, including from France, and some in the region do not always realize that Parliament has been playing an important role in this. Germany, I think, sent a minister-level delegation, was it 2 years ago, 1 year? Last year. So this is extremely important. And so I think we have to go on with this development. Lithuania, of course, accepted the opening of a Taiwanese representative office in Vilnius, leading to retaliatory measures from Beijing against Lithuania, but also against the EU as a whole, indirectly or more directly. So for the EU, the most important, and China will of course apply pressure, but pressure is less and less effective in a way, also because the economic situation in China is not as good as it used to be. So I don't remember who said once, but the main instrument of soft power or manipulation from China is its economic attractivity. So as this is also degrading, maybe we will see more change. So the most important for EU is to, of course, cannot play a strong military role, a little bit, but still. But the most important is to try to deter Beijing from any temptation to use force against Taiwan, including, as I said, gray zone tactics, by stressing in a coordinated manner at the EU level the cost in economic terms that China would have to pay if it decided to use that kind of moves or capacity. Plus, giving more space to Taiwan would also be a good move, supporting the legitimacy of Taiwan participation to multilateral organizations, for instance. The EU is an economic, very important player, and it has a way to make some of the countries recognize maybe where their true interest lies. And so I will stop here. I have been long enough already. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for providing this overview about our relations. I like only to emphasize that we have also since now more than maybe 10 years also the visa waiver program with Taiwan, and we can freely travel the Taiwanese citizens and European citizens in both directions. Now online, I have the pleasure to invite Mr. Rizal Hisao, Executive Director, Global Taiwan Institute, Trend Lines in US-Taiwan Relations, Public and Elite Opinions.
Okay, well, thank you very much to the European Parliament, as well as Ambassador Lee and all the distinguished attendees, as well as panelists, sharing both the virtual stage with me here, as well as there in person. It's really an honor for me to be able to participate in this very important discussion, and certainly at a very important forum there at the European Parliament. Let me start by tackling this question by making 3 quick general observations about the topic of today's conference. And given the fact that my organization, the Global Taiwan Institute, is a Washington-based think tank, my perspective will certainly come from a Washington perspective. The first general observation is that U.S. support for Taiwan's democracy remains robust and strongly bipartisan. The second of which is that that support is not based on a preference for a particular outcome in Taiwan's elections, but predicated on the necessity and to preserve Taiwan's democratic institution and critically the maintenance of peace and stability. Third general observation is that the election of the ruling DPPs Lai Ching-te and Shelby Kim as president and vice president, respectively, signal that there will be more continuity than change in the trajectory of U.S.-Taiwan relations. And that as the sort of the macro backdrop, let me turn to the specific of the issue I was asked to address, which is the trend lines in American public and elite opinion on the Taiwan's defense. And here I think it's important to set this topic in the proper context. And that is over the past 8 years, China's threats to Taiwan have grown increasingly acute. This has both been exemplified and exacerbated by the many examples of the types of threats and coercions as discussed by the prior presenters, but certainly by the squashing of Hong Kong's limited autonomy under one country, two systems, the geopolitical turmoil caused by Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine, and as well as the renewed kinetic conflict in the Middle East in the Israel-Hamas war. Now, President Joe Biden, who has began his presidency 3 years ago, has stated now on 4 occasions that he would come to Taiwan's defense if CCP General Secretary Xi Jinping ordered the PLA to invade the island democracy. The U.S. intelligence community has assessed that Xi has ordered the PLA to be ready by 2027 to forcibly annex Taiwan if necessary. That assessment deserves a caveat, however, since, as analysts understand, capabilities do not equal intent, which is shaped by far more complex conditions. Nonetheless, Biden's incremental clarity on the U.S. commitment to Taiwan's defense underscored the need for stronger assurances, both for deterrence and response to the intensifying PRC threats and coercions against Taiwan. Now, while the views of U.S. leaders are routinely expressed and demonstrated and parsed through policy statements as well as actions taken by the administrations, the sentiments of the American public are less readily observable, generalizable, and thus somewhat less understood within the broader policy discourse. So I think it's important to add some nuance here in terms of our discussions as representatives as part of the European Parliament as representative of democracies, that as China's military threats against Taiwan become even more severe, and certainly especially since August 2022, and certainly as the possibility of another conflict in the East Asia looms on the horizon, a crucial question must be asked. What does the American public think about coming to the defense of Taiwan against the PRC? Now, to this question, the US-based think tank Chicago Council on Global Affairs makes a valuable contribution by conducting the most consistent and rigorous opinion polls in the public domain that covered the views of the American public on pressing international issues. And this includes their views on Taiwan and US policy on Taiwan's defense. These polls have been conducted by the Council since 1982. And I think it's very important to highlight a noticeable and significant increase in the number of Americans who support the use of troops in China invaded, rising from 35% in 2018 to a historic high of 52% in 2021, versus just, of course, 19% in 1982. This sharp increase tracks with the noteworthy improvements in bilateral relations between the United States and Taiwan in recent years, with American favorability ratings of Taiwan hitting record highs. These trends also tracks with another independent study conducted by a DC-based think tank, the Center for Strategic and International Studies, in its 2020 study, the results of which show that Americans, in fact, are prepared to take substantial risk to defend Taiwan, However, it is also important to add some caveats here. Another Chicago Council poll conducted a year later in 2022, however, showed a sharp drop in supporting of committing troops to the defense of Taiwan, dropping from 52 to 44%. A further decline was again observed in 2023 of September, with only 39% expressing support. This returns to the question of what then could account for the sharp increase and subsequent decrease in the support of the use of troops to defend Taiwan. One plausible interpretation is that the spike in 2021 in support for Taiwan's defense with the use of troops was in fact an anomaly in the historical trend line. This momentary surge may have been the result of residual U.S. appreciation of Taiwan's support during the COVID-19 pandemic, coupled with widespread animosity towards China for its heavy-handed response to the virus. Indeed, the drop back to the 38% average was more likely to return to the pre-pandemic average and is more consistent with historic rates. Furthermore, the subsequent drop may be further attributable to the outbreak of war in Ukraine in February 2022. The Russian invasion of Ukraine, no doubt, sparked heated and ongoing debates here in the United States about U.S. respond to the pacing challenge of China's rise as a result of the diversion of finite resources to Ukraine and more broadly about America's military footprint in the world. The proximate drop in U.S. Support corresponds to the beginning of the Ukraine war, and there appears to be a correlation between the two. This could be attributable to a rising feeling of war fatigue in the United States, which was also amplified by the 2021 withdrawal from Afghanistan. Now, with kinetic conflict, military conflict reigniting the Middle East, it remains unclear how public support for the defense of Taiwan with the use of troops will shift in the coming months. It thus stands to reason that the ongoing war in Ukraine has had a measurable impact of American support for Taiwan, and is likely dampening the American public's willingness to commit troops to come to Taiwan's defense. Although it should be noted that the reasons for such views are not precisely clear. It is worth perhaps pointing out that debates continue to rage within the Congress about whether supporting Ukraine is a vital U.S. interest, with some arguing that doing so serves as an unnecessary drain on resources. However, against the backdrop of China's increasing aggression against Taiwan and growing unfavorable views towards China within the United States and across the world, support for Taiwan remains substantial, especially when compared to the paltry 19% of who supported involvement in 1982. Another important point to keep in mind is that the same Chicago Council poll that asked about the use of troops also asked respondents whether they would support a range of other actions. And therein, I think we find a very reassuring signal from the majority of Americans who also support imposing economic and diplomatic sanctions on China at 75%, sending additional arms and military supplies to the Taiwanese government at 62%, using also the U.S. Navy to break a Chinese blockade around Taiwan at 50%. Which brings me to my conclusion. While Taipei should certainly feel assured by President Biden's statements of clarity with regards to Taiwan's defense, it cannot and should never be taken as a given, and certainly not in unqualified terms. Long-standing policy has never precluded the president's authority to commit to come to Taiwan's defense, and has always been long-standing policy of the United States to oppose the use of military force to change the status quo. The key going forward, and has always been, whether there is a sufficient level of clarity necessary to satisfy a minimum threshold of reciprocal commitments on all sides to preserve peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait, to establish a division of labor between the United States, Taiwan, and like-minded allies and partners. And as always, in any democracy, public support will be an important factor, not only as a demonstration of commitment, but also as a gauge for the public's appetite and resolve for any action taken by our governments. This will be critical for preserving peace and stability in the region, and therefore it's incumbent on leaders, elected leaders, representatives, to communicate the gravity and importance of this situation. To wrap things up, I think given recent trends in both public and private exchanges between the United States and Taiwan, particularly President Biden's decision to dispatch former Deputy Secretary of State Jim Steinberg and former National Security Advisor Stephen Haley alongside AAT Chairman Laura Rosenberger, to convey the Biden administration's congratulations to Taiwan and support for its democracy, which was also then quickly followed by Representative Ami Bera, as well as Representative Mario Diaz-Balart, who are co-chairs of the Congressional Taiwan Caucus, to visit following. There should be no doubt that Taiwan remains a top concern for all Americans. And I think that it will remain so for the foreseeable future. And this bodes well for the future of U.S.-Taiwan relations. I'll close there. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for sharing your opinion and your insights on the U.S.-Taiwan relations. Now, last but not least, Madame Teresa Fallo, Director, Center for Russia, Europe, and Asia Studies, about the challenges and opportunities for a transatlantic approach to cross-strait relations. Please.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks all of you for coming here today. This shows how much interest has grown in Europe in regard to Taiwan. I've been living here in Brussels for about 17 years, and some people wouldn't even know where Taiwan was in the past. So I've really seen a ramping up of interest in Taiwan. And I want to thank the MEPs who are hosting this event. I think this is absolutely brilliant and it should be applauded. So thank you so much. Just carrying on from what Russell was talking about, the Chicago Council poll, you can maybe tell from my accent. I'm American, but I'm also Irish. So I'm perfect for transatlantic panels. And I'm married to an Italian. My kids grew up in Russia and China, and now they live in Belgium. So I don't know which box you want to stick me in, but I love this topic. So the most striking parallel, I would say, in the last 2.5 years, we've really seen in 2.5 years, a really ramping up in interest in Europe and the U.S. on transatlantic relation on Taiwan. In the past, Europe was kind of a grab bag, one China principle, one China policy, but everyone is pretty much on the same page with one China policy. We have an outlier, Spain. They still use one China principle. And sometimes some leaders, and I can say this because I have an Irish passport, they mess it up. They compare Taiwan with Northern Ireland and Ireland. So we need to get the word out. We need to continue with the education. I think that's really key. But there are really growing parallels with the US and the EU on transatlantic approaches to Taiwan. I mean, when I grew up in the US, my friend Linda Huang would go to Taiwan in the summer, and she would bring back, once she brought back this like wooden fan, and in my mind, I was like, oh my gosh, I have to go to Taiwan. So I was exposed at a really early age to Taiwanese people. And when I lived and worked in Japan in the 1980s, I went to Taiwan. So I've seen a whole evolution in Taiwan from the mid 80s until I was just there in June. But I've really seen massive change, and it's such an impressive country with such a vibrant democracy. They really do need our support. So we've seen Taiwan move up the EU's agenda, as this meeting, as I mentioned, demonstrates. Ursula von der Leyen's speech on March 31st noted that she didn't want to see any unilateral provocations. June 29th and 30th, the EU Council conclusions specifically talked about the Taiwan Strait, and at the December 7th EU-China summit, both Ursula von der Leyen and Charles Michel's press comments brought up the Taiwan Strait. This is a massive change and a very positive change. In the past, they might have talked about Taiwan, but they would never say it publicly. So I think that this is an important evolution. And talking about the Taiwan Strait as a global good has only come up in the last 9 months. So we're really seeing, this shift, this tectonic shift. We've also seen legislative engagements with Taiwan from MEPs, which included sanctioned MEPs. Reinhard Bütikofer was here earlier. Marianne Lexman, who were sanctioned in November 2022. Members of the Trade Committee have been traveling to Taiwan. The Czech National Parliament officials, Finnish National Parliament, the German education minister. So Taiwan people are going, and it's really on their agenda. And I think that that's really important. Another area where we see transatlantic cooperation is on Lithuania, from a political and democratic angle. And they talk about democratic partnerships to support Taiwan's democracy, and as earlier mentioned, disinformation, free trade, and being a good trade partner. This is an area of alignment I would not have expected. So these are very positive developments. Europe has been a great partner in Taiwan's meaningful participation in the WHA. This is largely on everyone's agenda because of COVID. We all suffered COVID. Taiwan, I kept them so carefully. I still have the Taiwan masks because I used them so judiciously during COVID. So people really appreciated what Taiwan did with sharing of PPE and sharing best practices on how to deal with COVID. So I think that that really elevated them in the public's attention. And that, I know this is a granular approach, but it's extremely important for Taiwan to, and Europe has been quite vocal and strong to advocate for them to participate in international organizations to prevent them from being suffocated. And right here, right now, this event helps to improve the knowledge of Taiwan, but we really do need to do more. And then I'm going to mention the M word. We remember what happened when President Macron went to Beijing. So as Europe is a bigger investor in Taiwan with about 55 billion more than double than the US, Taiwan is clearly important for Europe and European interests, and Taiwan should not be thrown under the bus. So I advocate for a three-part strategy. We all have to do this to keep your attention. So 1, transatlantic cooperation on shared challenges. 2, strengthening ourselves and building resilience. And 3rd, we need to work on building a coalition of deterrence and assurance to ensure peace in the Taiwan Strait. So everyone seems to be very aware of Taiwan Strait issues. The language coming out of Beijing has really heightened it on everyone's agenda. So there's an equal willingness to look at this from both the US and European sides. The problem is, you know, we have a war in Ukraine. Europeans had sanction packages on Russia. And so they need to think about a different approach to Taiwan, because the approach to Russia was reactive, right? So once they did something, they have about 11 or 12 suites of sanction packages. So to increase deterrence, Europe really needs to come up with packages so that China will feel deterred from doing anything there. And this, you know, China's not Russia. Russia has the economy the size of Spain. They're the #1 trade partner of 120 countries. They're important for foundational technology, quantum computing, AI. Every country in the world has some aspect of their supply chains wrapped up with China. So it's much more of a challenge, I would say, to design a sanctions package. And it might be painful. So we have to really think ahead. And we need the weight. We need Europe's political weight, but we also need the weight of Europe with the US and other G7 and G20 countries to make this work. So there are a variety of tools available. There are maximalist and minimalist strategies. And most economic tools have higher paying for like-minded partners than China. So, but the key is that these conversations are taking place now. So there's been a huge change. You know, over the summer, they had roundtables talking with various European partners in a transatlantic context about what could be done. So this is really important. And I think that it will always be a moving target. Beijing will try to figure out how to respond. But I think this is sharpening people's minds and attention and coming up with some interesting ideas. So to start with, 1, transatlantic partners and Taiwan should scale up private coordination and signaling. The role of economic countermeasures in a Taiwan crisis are still in the early stages, but given the challenges involved in agreeing upon red lines and appropriate countermeasures, pragmatic discussions around contingencies must be a priority. So there are shared vulnerabilities. Meanwhile, EU member states need to privately message to China the extent they are willing to go in using economic tools to counter Chinese aggression toward Taiwan. Coordination with Taiwanese officials is also crucial. So as I mentioned earlier, we can't do it just even in a transatlantic context. We have to reach out further to the G7, and they should coordinate beyond the membership to G20 and other like-minded partners. Unlike in the case with Russia, there's a huge scale of disruption. We're just getting a taste of what just trade disruption looks like with the pinch point in the Red Sea. Can you imagine how trade will be affected should anything explode in that region in Asia? So Europe is very well aware of these economic pinch points. We need to take practical steps now to boost the credibility of deterrence. This may require legal steps, including shoring up any of the EU's frameworks for export controls, advanced preparation of US executive orders specifying and granting sanctions, and preliminary analysis on the potential impact and spillovers of proposed packages. So the goal is to have kind of an asymmetric approach, try to find what are the most difficult areas to kind of, lower level banks on a minimalist approach, or the largest Chinese banks at a maximalist approach, how to affect the PLA, certain industries which the PLA need, like aerospace. So these are all being thought about and discussed now. And then we need to invest in other forms of deterrence. Economic countermeasures should be considered as part of a whole of government and multilateral strategy, as they have costs and limitations that can make them less effective on their own. These tools will be more effective when paired with traditional tools of deterrence in both military and diplomatic realms. And then we also need to keep lines of communication open. Maintain open communication lines and regular exchanges with Chinese counterparts is a key element in any risk mitigating strategy. And balance credible threats and credible assurances. Make clear to Beijing that it has no desire to change the status quo in the Taiwan Strait. Efforts to maintain the status quo and shore up traditional diplomatic, military, economic tools to ensure peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait should be the priority. So to conclude, with the three-part strategy. So transatlantic cooperation on shared challenges. 2, we need to strengthen ourselves and build resilience. And 3, transatlantic relations are key, but we need to expand and work on building coalitions with G7, G20, and other like-minded partners to ensure peace in the Taiwan Strait, and to kind of hold up Taiwan as this democracy to all 1.4 billion people and show that they can live and thrive. So thank you for your attention. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Madam Fayon, giving us these strategies. Very, very good, very useful as a summary. Now we are coming to the question and answering session, and I'm very pleased and welcome all of you to give your input or questions or remarks or whatever do you like to share with us and with the panelists. Hopefully we can answer the questions. We are very disciplined and we are, so to say, on time. So please.
May
yes,
I maybe raise some questions? My question is related with chips. So as we know, Taiwan is producing 80 to 90% of those most advanced 5 nanometers chips. And we know also that the biggest consumer of chips is People's Republic of China. They are consuming about 50% of those most advanced chips in the world. So, but we know also that Americans, they own practically 100% of those patents under which we are producing those chips. So, and President Biden prohibited selling of those 5 nanometers chips to People's Republic of China. This Taiwan semiconductor manufacturing company was like a shield for Taiwan. If some crazy people from China wanted to sell some missiles to Taiwan, then the result was pretty clear. They will destroy their own economy. But now, when there is this prohibition, my question is Taiwan less protected?
Thank you very much. Should we collect a few questions or direct some of the panelists would like to answer to this question? Who would like to?
I can jump on that.
Okay, very good.
Do you want to collect more questions or just go for this one?
Let's go one by one.
Let's go one by one.
Well,
it's better.
Thank you, Mr. Anzeb, for this very interesting and frequently asked questions. Taiwan is indeed a leader in the manufacturing of semiconductors, but we have to understand, first of all, the semiconductor sector is very much integrated into a global system. So it's not on Taiwan is very much the leader in the manufacturing side, but also we have European companies and including, for example, ASML and IMEC here in Belgium, as a leader in the machineries and also the softwares that control those machines. And we have, of course, branding companies like Apple or NVIDIA or AMD in the US. So it's a collaboration of countries, and that includes, of course, China. So the key message is come back to this so-called the concept of silicon shield. The impact of any military conflict in Taiwan is not only creating problems for Taiwan. We are talking about the impact on the entire system, because the system relies on each other so much and so concentrated that I think the world will be seeing an economic impact that has never been witnessed before if there is a conflict in the Taiwan Strait on Taiwan. Also, but the impact it won't be only on Taiwan. If there's a conflict elsewhere, the impact will be equally large, right? So, and for the time being, China being a major stakeholder in that system, it has the incentive to refrain from moving across the line to avoid military intervention in that regard. But the key message here, the problem, I have to say, the problem is, in historical context, at least as far as the CCP is concerned, they don't really make their critical strategic decisions based on economic impact. They don't even account much on the human impact on their strategic decisions. They look at the long-term glory of the party and the state. They talk about the rejuvenation of the great Chinese states. And they talk about the glory of the leader, personal glory of the leader. And all the costs, economic, especially on the chips, can be kind of compromised if they facilitate to achieve this great glory of the leader and of the party. So that is the risk we have to face. So really deterring China is really to increase the costs and uncertainties on achieving the so-called the glory or the rejuvenation of the leader and the states, rather than putting on the economic costs. So my first response to your question is, yes, the economic impact will be significant, so large that most of us cannot really imagine. But to the contrary, in China, they don't really care. If that's the roadblock to prevent China to achieve this glory of the party, the leader, and the country, they will do it nonetheless. So deterring China is really on strength. It's really on the economic power. It's really on the military power. Chips alone, I'm afraid, that won't be able to prevent China to cross the line. That's the first thing. The second thing is Taiwan is working very closely with the EU partners on this chip production. And one thing we need to be aware is also China is trying to de-risk itself from its reliance on the chips designed by US and European companies, manufactured by European machines, and manufactured by Taiwanese companies. They are trying to de-risk from this system by creating its own domestic autonomous chip sector. And that is the strategic reason behind these 300 billion US dollars of subsidies they are putting into their semiconductor sector. It's not only for business, more primarily it's for we should see that as a de-risking approach. So we have to be careful. De-risking is not only what we have been doing. China has been doing de-risking for the last 30 years, and they've been accelerating to do that on chips. Once they feel confident that they are now de-risked, they have achieved that level of de-risking from from the chips global semiconductor system, that will encourage China to make crazy decisions further. So it's a complicated answer, but there are several things that had unfolding and happening at the same time. So we really have to be, recognize the risks we are facing. Thank you.
If I may, just make 3 quick points to supplement what Ambassador Lee had said, and I think he covered a lot of the issues I wanted to raise as well. But 3 quick points. The first of which is that the PRC's threats against Taiwan predates the growing international attention with regards paid to the critical importance of Taiwan's in the global supply chain. And with or without the semiconductors, the PRC's threats and claims over Taiwan will continue regardless of whether or not there is this interdependency or dependency on Taiwan for its semiconductors. A second interrelated point is that the PRC has been taking very concerted steps to establish self-sufficiency, to purposefully, to reduce its own perceived dependence on the international markets in order to achieve greater autonomy in its strategic decisions. I think deliberately and on purpose for its broader strategic ambitions, which leads to the third point, which is the importance of continuing to de-risk from the PRC market, both taken by I think the efforts of the Biden administration to establish greater controls of critical technology that is fueling the PRC's technological advancements, military advancements. But furthermore, I think the need for Taipei to continue its de-risking efforts, because whether or not Taiwan and China have a close economic partnership does not mitigate the increased threats that the PRC poses with its continued military modernization that has continued. Irregardless of the political conditions across the Taiwan Strait, even in periods when there was, seemingly stability in cross-strait relations, the PRC has not stopped its military modernization and its power projection capabilities and development of specific targeted capabilities in a Taiwan contingency scenario. So I do think with regards to strengthening, deterrence against the PRC's, destructive actions in terms of a blockade or or God forbid, an invasion of Taiwan, it's all the more important to strengthen our collective resilience and our economic security. And that means, working closely more with like-minded allies and partners and de-risking from the PRC market and strengthening our collective economic resilience. And I think that would be an added feature of the deterrence package that has heretofore been focused primarily on the military dimensions, and I think the economic security dimension needs to be given more weight. And there, I think the Europeans and other like-minded partners amongst the G8 and to Teresa's earlier excellent point, really to broaden that out, because that is that could be what can tip the balance in Beijing's calculation with regards to whether or not it will engage in a very destructive military action that would have economic and security ramifications well beyond what we've witnessed in Ukraine thus far.
Just one additional comment to everyone's excellent points. The Biden administration's approach has been a small yard or a small garden here in Europe and a high fence. But it seems that, for example, Dutch ASML, they've discovered that it's a company that makes the machines that actually make the semiconductors. And they've seen a 350% increase of sales to China. So I thought that there seemed to have been some agreement to cooperate, but now there's concerns that maybe with this massive increase in sales, it's going to be far more difficult than we had expected.
Thank you, Andrews.
Well, as you see here in the parliament, maps with name Andrus, Andrei, or Andrus, we have privilege when we are talking about Iran. So that's clear picture. So that's, yeah. But I will move maybe to some geopolitical question, in not so much about Taiwan, but about the Western how to say, attitude to all the developments related with China, Taiwan, and so on and so on. Ambassador, when you described, what is Chinese attitude, great glory of the leaders and the state, of course, it reminded me what we see in Russia, the same, and I see that parallel, and I'm always asking myself, so, what kind of conclusions we can make? Because at least, in our region, what we have seen, first of all, Putin came like some kind of modernizer. Then he became, he started to become more and more authoritarian with violation of human rights, and democracy and freedom of speech and so on and so on. And then he became aggressive. And we failed to deter him from that, external aggression. And now I'm looking into China. So at first it was, modernization, with Deng Xiaoping and so on and so on. Then we see, and even maybe before, we started to see, more and more violation of human rights, Uyghurs and Hong Kong and so on and so on. Now we see really that Xi moved into some kind of what I call, from Chinese authoritarian regime, at least limited in terms. Now he moved into what I would call typical, Russian style, authoritarian regime with no limits in terms. And my prediction is that if we shall not be able to deter very clearly, so really there is quite a big possibility that he will make another step, if to compare with, in external aggression. Now, what we learned, that such guys like Putin can be deterred only if you are showing, some kind of strength and force. If you are trying to very nicely to try to diplomatically to speak about reset, and so on and so on, then you fail. You are not deterred. So, and here is my point, very simple, So, I'm asking myself how China now is looking into the West. In my opinion, they're very carefully looking how the West is showing itself in Ukraine. And if the West is showing weakness, then China will make its own conclusions that, well, the West is weak. Why should we, the West has no power to deter. And I am quite surprised by American attitude. I was recently in Washington, D.C., and while speaking with, quite well-known experts, some of them were saying, well, United States has no enough of, power to be present in all the conflicts. So we shall concentrate, all our efforts on China, and we do not have resources for Ukraine. My point was, this is a big mistake, because you will show to China, you will send a signal that the West is really not so strong, it's weak, and we cannot protect Ukraine. So my question is, how you see that capability of the West to show the strength in general to deter China from moving into some kind of stupid external adventures, and how we can show to the whole democratic world that this is what we need to do. If we want really to avoid bigger problems, we need to show the strength. And that will not be done by Taiwan alone, or by us alone somewhere. So that's my more geopolitical question.
So I don't know who would like to say about this very difficult to answer question on this to say, but maybe you can do it.
I'll jump in
Yes.
first, if you allow me. First of all, I think China's worldview has changed in the last 5-10 years. We believe that Xi Jinping firmly believes that the notion that the East is rising and the West is declining. And he firmly believed that. Many of his decisions based on that belief. Now, one of the so-called declining demonstration is actually the problem with our democratic system. They see democracy not as for the benefits, but as the weakness and the flaws and the problems of a democratic process. Whereas they have this Chinese style of democracy and they become strong and efficient. right? So that's, I think it's very important to understand China from their basic definition of the worldview or the world as they understand it. It's very different from us. So the key here is how we deter that, right? So very quickly, again, I think everything comes back to the notion that if you want to maintain peace, you have to have strength. And that's exactly what happened here in EU. Let's remember China's GDP is 10 times larger than that of Russia. 10 times. Even though their military power hasn't been able to reach the level of Russia, but they are spending 3.5% of their GDP on military investment. What happened 10 years from now? They definitely will become the #1 superpower in terms of military capabilities after this, exceeding that of Russia. So we're talking about a very equally, if not more ambitious, China that is much larger than Russia, much capable than Russia, but equally ambitious and with a very different worldview. That is, I believe, is the source of risk. We need to work together. Now, finally, you see in EU, in Europe, we have 27 members joining the EU. We have an even larger member as member of the NATO, and Russia being our #1 threat. Not only threats, it's actually actual target of intimidation. But there are still people in Europe believe that, well, Taiwan is okay. They can face China alone. You know, we don't need to come. That's the thing that has always puzzled me. You know, if we have to do this in Europe, we have to do that in the Taiwan Strait. That's by the same, following Mr. Kabler's argument. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. Yes.
I'll do a quick chime in.
And then, in any case, the ambassador has the closing remarks.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, there's that old Latin saying, if you want peace, prepare for war. And we see now with what's happening in the Red Sea, you know, Europe might be sending at the end of February. Europe needs, they need to do more, is my point. Not just burden sharing, but burden shifting, because there are limited amounts of munitions that the U.S. has. China has more ships than the U.S. When U.S. ships go to the Red Sea, the crews get tired, the ships need to be rotated, and they're far away from Asia Pacific, where they probably need to be closer to. So I think Europe needs to do more. And I think this whole issue of munitions, if Russia should do anything horrible and expand it to NATO. I read that Germany's munitions would run out in like 3 hours. So this is not, you know, if you want peace, prepare for war. That's not happening. And I think that we have to, there's some people who are really reluctant to connect the Indo-Pacific. I just saw a new think tank article saying Europe shouldn't talk about the Indo-Pacific. And this person, I won't say his name, but he just came back from China. So that's pretty much a Chinese talking point. So I think that we have to see that what happens in all of these regions has impact on European security as well. And they have to have, you know, not be like, are you leaving? We're worried about Trump. But they really have to start investing more. And they should be able to take care of something in the Red Sea. That's where their interests lie.
Yes, you're absolutely right. And we need to talk about the single market for defense in Europe. We need to talk about our efficiency in spending the money for armament. We failed to produce the 1 million artillery shells for Ukraine. North Korea provided this to Russia. I mean, we are indeed not prepared for peace. And this is why we need to prepare for, not for war, but we need to be prepared. We need to be prepared. We don't like this war, but we need to be prepared. This is very clear, and I think this will be also one of the main topics in the electoral campaign now in Europe in upcoming European elections. But I would like, first of all, to thank you to all of you and give the possibility again to the ambassador to have the closing remarks of this very interesting discussion on Taiwan after the elections and the implications for the whole region.
Well, thank you very much. Once again, I want to thank the three MEP who co-hosting today's very interesting events, and also the five expert panelists joined the discussion. I just want to share with you the final remarks. We are really in the need for our European colleagues and friends to stand with Taiwan to defend and maintain the status quo in the Taiwan Strait. And a status quo that is defined by three elements. First of all, the future of Taiwan has to be decided in a democratic process by the Taiwanese population. And that is a status quo because we have been doing that for the last 50 years, and we would like to keep that into the future. And the second status quo is that Taiwan and PRC, we do trade, we travel, but in terms of governance and political system, we have no jurisdiction with each other in the last 75, 80 years. And that is the fact. And that is the status quo. And finally, the status quo also means that any disagreements and disputes have to be resolved through a peaceful and through a mutual communication process. And that has been the case. They stopped doing that. We would like to keep that status quo. So when I'm urging you, when you are thinking about defending Taiwan together to maintain the status quo, you probably have to remind each other, including ourselves, what is the status quo we are defending? We are defending the very fact that is happening on the ground in Taiwan. So once again, thank you very much for organizing the event, and so thank you for your participation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. Good. Andre?
Commissioner for Defense.
Of course, yes.
Ivan.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
Thanks for organizing.
Okay.
No, it's we'll keep you updated with.
Ambassador, you should stand in the middle.
Of course, please, my pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah.
And the speakers? Oh, maybe with the MEP first.
Okay.
Okay, thank
Good,
you.
good.
Yes. Teresa, can we have a group photo?
Please. Join us.
Yeah, well, I think they all go offline now. It's quite late in Taipei now. So, you know.
Okay.
Of course. Oh, okay. You have to run.
Okay.
Okay.
Good.
Last one. All right. Okay.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Good. Okay.
The three Andrews.
I could not participate. I'm not.
Yeah. You should change your name. Then you will be right. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Good. So see you.
Really enjoyable.
Thank you. And